If you're feeling undervalued, whether that's being overlooked for opportunities, maybe underpaid, or just not being recognized for the work that you do, I know what you want to hear. You're not imagining it. They're screwing you. Get out. I'm Tanya Andrews, and over the past decade, I have worked with hundreds of early career women from dozens of companies across industries like construction, mining, energy, tech, who have all felt this way at some point in time. The good news is that there's a systematic way to address this. It's not about demanding recognition and making ultimatums. It's about getting clear on your value, building your case, and having the right conversations the right way. So in this video, I'm going to give you a framework you can use in any undervaluing situation, and then we're going to tailor it to the four most common types that I see. But before I get into this framework, I want to acknowledge what makes this particularly challenging if you're an early career woman in a male-dominated industry. So you might be one of the few women at your level, which can make your contributions less visible or even sort of understood. You're definitely still building your professional reputation. So that means that every interaction feels like it carries more weight. And it can often feel like there's pressure to be grateful for what you have, rather than advocating for what you deserve. Now, here's the tricky part. I know that you're going to feel worried that speaking up about feeling undervalued is going to make you seem entitled or difficult. But staying silent rarely leads to that recognition or the opportunities that you're trying to get. So you kind of get stuck in this self-fulfilling loop. The key is trying to take the emotion and comparison to others out of it and approaching it strategically with clear evidence, professional language that focuses on value and outcomes. So with that in mind, let's get into that framework that you can use to help addressing that feeling of being undervalued. The first step is to identify what type of undervaluing you are experiencing, because each one requires a slightly different approach. Type 1 is a lack of recognition. So here, this is when you know your work is solid, but it's just not getting noticed. So you're starting to feel invisible, and that kicks off that thinking like, what's the point? Type number 2 is lack of opportunity. So in this case, you're being excluded from high impact projects or growth paths, and that makes you worried that you're never going to progress and you might fall behind your peers. And then type 3 is pay inequity. Here, you feel like your compensation doesn't match your contribution. So that brings on this sense of unfairness, and that is incredibly discouraging. And type 4 is a lack of inclusion or feeling like you have a voice. So in this case, this is about being left out of decision-making or meetings or information loops, which can make you worried that you're going to be left behind, and more so is actually compromising your ability to do your job. Now, most people experience a combination of these, but identifying the primary issue is going to help us shape out that approach. So now I'm going to share with you a 3-part framework that works for any of these experiences, and then we'll get into how you can apply it to each situation. So first, you need to get clear on your value. I know this step can feel uncomfortable, especially when you're early in your career and especially when you're in male-dominated environments. Chances are you're already worrying that listing out your achievements is going to come across as bragging, or you actually might genuinely struggle to even see what you've done as being considered good enough to put on the list. And then, to compound all of this, sometimes the culture around you reinforces that kind of like downplaying contributions and making recognition feel rare. But this isn't about ego. This is about having all the facts in front of you so you can speak to your value with clarity and confidence. So what I want you to do is list your recent achievements, and where you can, I want you to link them to outcomes like time you've saved, revenue that might have been generated, problems solved, or risks reduced. You want to be including evidence like emails or metrics, project results, and so on and so forth. But don't get too caught up on them being really big wins and then psyching yourself out of writing anything down. Value can look like any kind of progress. It might be strong collaborations, ideas, initiatives. Now, second, we're going to build our case and then plan your approach. So this is where you decide, what is the desired outcome you actually want to get here? Do you want more recognition? Is it about inclusion, more responsibility, or pay? Then you're going to gather up specific examples of your contributions and map out the best sort of timing and setting for the conversation. Now, again, Try to avoid getting caught up in complexity here. If your pathway to getting the outcome you want can be as easy as a 10-minute chat with your manager just to flag how you're feeling, that's what you're prepping for. If you're trying to wrangle a 15% pay rise, you're gonna have to get a little bit more detailed. So now, part 3, we've got to have the conversation. Yes, I know, the yucky bit, but I promise you, it doesn't have to be. Here, it's about keeping your language neutral and focused on the future. And you're trying to show that you want to align and contribute. You're not there to kind of just complain and compare yourself to others. Let me show you how this looks for each type. So I'm going to start with dealing with a lack of recognition. So for those first 2 steps, make sure that you're tracking your wins regularly. Whatever's comfortable for you, maybe weekly. So then at least you have some concrete examples ready for your conversation. Then you want to build your case by just picking a couple of those examples that are showing consistent value over time. Once you've done that, then you have the conversation. So, this you can say something like, I've been leading X and Y with strong results, and I want to make sure my contributions are visible to the wider team. How could we make that happen? Now, one thing I love to add in here is to actually try to offer a solution at the end there. So I'd like to present the project outcomes to everyone next week at our team meeting. So you can see what that does is you've actually said, this is how I can suggest that I get the recognition, and that really helps out your manager. Now, if you feel like you're missing out on opportunities, for example, first what you want to do is list out the specific projects or roles that you want, the opportunities you want, and why you're a good fit for them. So from there, you can build your case by then matching your skills and your results to the opportunities you want. Then when it comes time to have the conversation, you can kind of come in saying, I'm interested in contributing to this specific project. I've built skills in like X and Y that I feel like would help deliver some strong results. What are the next steps so that I can get involved? And remember, if we want to take that extra step into solutions, you can actually pose the idea of, I was thinking about arranging a meeting with the project lead, if that's okay with you. In cases when you're dealing with pay inequity, I firstly want to acknowledge there are a lot of variables here. We need to keep in mind things like company structure, succession planning, budget, project cycles, and just broadly how the organization itself is actually growing and evolving. But in combination with those things, your strongest baseline approach is going to be to build an understanding of those elements as best you can, while also going out to the market to get some data for comparison. So then when we go to step 2, where you're trying to build your case, make sure that you're super clear on where your responsibilities and scope have increased since your last pay review. And then how does that stack up against the wider market? So when you're ready, you can come into that conversation by saying something like, I'm keen to have a conversation about my salary. Over the last year, my responsibilities have grown, and here are some of the outcomes I've achieved. And I'd like to see how my package can be brought in line with this. And lastly, if you're dealing with lack of inclusion, identify where you feel like you're being excluded. Particularly look for areas that would actually help you do your job better. Then you want to show how being included is ultimately going to help your team or your manager or your project. So when you come in to have the conversation, you can say something like, I've noticed that I'm not always looped into discussions on this topic, and I feel like my perspective could help with, say something specific. Could we make sure that I'm included going forward? Or, you know what's coming. If it's possible, take the reins and finish up with, can I get the dates and times of the next few meetings, and I'll get myself added onto the calendar, make sure I don't miss out on anything moving forward. What we're doing here is we are stripping out the emotion and we're leaning into facts. And we're clearly outlining, what do you want to happen next? So that way you're giving the person who's actually in a position to help you exactly what they need to help you in the way that you want. Now, final hot tip. Before you step into any of these conversations, it really helps to get as much perspective as possible. So grab a trusted colleague, mentor, or a friend and run these thoughts past them. And then what they can do is they can help you refine your approach, they can point out blind spots, and ultimately you're going to feel more confident when you go in to actually deliver your message. Sometimes an outside view will catch things that you've missed, or they can suggest ways to phrase something so it lands a bit better. Now you should have a pretty good foundation to work with. You want to name the type of undervaluing you're experiencing, work through that broad approach I just gave you, and tailor your conversation to the specific situation. And you know I love a resource, so there's a link below to download a career wins tracker that will help you start mapping out that value with 20 easy wins straight out the gate. Now, do keep in mind, if repeated efforts don't change things, see it as information, not failure. Sometimes the best option may be to find an environment that does value what you bring to the table. You're not obligated to stay somewhere that consistently undervalues you, especially if it's affecting your confidence or your career growth. Now, with that being said, I know that workplace dynamics can be incredibly complex and nerve-wracking to navigate. Maybe you're dealing with a manager who dismisses your contributions, or you're in a team where certain types of work are just not valued, right? Or you're navigating cultural differences in how recognition is given. Inside the collective, we dive deep into these nuanced situations. We cover advanced strategies for building your case, handling pushback when you are advocating for yourself, and knowing when it's time to move on versus when to keep pushing. Plus, you get live coaching where you can work through your specific situation and get personalized advice. If you want to find out more about the collective, I've left a link in the description box below. Otherwise, I'll leave you with this. Remember, your contributions matter, and you might just be one conversation away from getting that recognition. You got this.